Hi everyone, my name is Cho and I'm the founder of Impetus LSAT. Over the years, I've had the pleasure of working with many students and helping many of them improve 15 or more points on this exam. In today's video, I wanted to share with you some common mistakes that you might be making that could be holding you back on improving on this exam. So the first mistake I wanted to discuss is studying for the exam as if it's an undergrad test. So in an undergrad exam, how would you typically prepare? Probably studied by just memorizing a bunch of facts. And usually you could get away with that in undergrad because undergrad exams are typically knowledge-based. However, for the LSAT, keep in mind that it's more of a skill-based exam. So while memorizing certain things can be helpful, it's just not going to be enough to get you to the next level. So rather than thinking about trying to improve as you would on an undergrad exam, try to think about improving as you would on anything that is skill-based, such as trying to improve on a sport, or an instrument, or anything like that. So let's take basketball, for example. So if you're trying to get better at basketball, you probably wouldn't try to get better by just running across the court as fast as you possibly can, dunking on people, dribbling while you're sprinting and all that type of stuff, right? You probably started off by just trying to learn how to dribble first, just bouncing the ball off the ground as many times as you possibly could. And another thing to keep in mind is that the process of dribbling is not a really complicated thing, right? You just bounce it off the ground and then you bounce it off the ground again. However, even though it's such a simple task, people do it over and over and over again, and that's really the only way that they get better. And why is that? It's because even though the task itself is pretty simple, putting everything together in one fluid motion can actually become pretty complex. So that's how I want you to focus on the LSAT. Focus on the LSAT by trying to put everything together in one fluid motion. And so for that reason, you shouldn't be satisfied just from getting a question correct. You should actually continue to repeat the same question, even if you know the answer, just so that you're able to really hash out the process and you're able to put everything together into one fluid motion. Remember, it's all about the process, not just about knowing what the answer is, because you're not going to have the same exact answer for every single question. The second thing I'd like to discuss is picking the wrong company to go with. Okay, so the fact of the matter is everybody is different, right? But a lot of times people will pick a prep company just because it was recommended to them by someone else. And one thing to keep in mind is not everyone is the same. And so we don't all learn the same way. And so one teaching style might be more suitable for me than it would be for someone else, right? And so for that reason, I would encourage you to actually try out these prep companies yourself rather than just going off of what someone else tells you. Now, most of these prep companies out there offer free resources where you can actually try things out. You can try out a free trial. You can try out certain services that they offer. And that could give you a better idea of what you can expect if you were to start prepping with that particular company. Now, keep in mind, most of these prep companies are not cheap, right? So make sure you do your research before you actually fork over a lot of money. I've heard horror stories of students who fork over thousands of dollars to their tutors who are just giving them explanations for why they got a question right or why they got a question wrong. And in my personal opinion, that is horrible because that is something that you could easily find in a textbook for $20 to $40, or sometimes you can even find these explanations online for free. So if you are getting a tutor, make sure you're finding a tutor who's actually going to do the extra work, who's going to explain to you these concepts in detail, help you understand what your weaknesses are, and help you prioritize your studies. Another thing to consider is if a prep course doesn't provide you with any free resources, be skeptical of that, right? Be very cautious with that because if a company is truly confident in their service or product and they know that you're going to join for the long haul once you try it out, there's no reason why they wouldn't offer a free service of any kind. Okay, so the third mistake I'd like to talk about is just repeating the same thing, banging your head over and over, trying to get different results. So I'm sure you all have heard that famous saying, the definition of insanity is repeating the same thing, expecting different results. And that's no different on the LSAT. Now, don't get me wrong. There's a time and place for repetition, right? Like we discussed before, sometimes you're going to repeat the same question over and over again until it just becomes fluid to you. But in this case, what I'm talking about is people who are trying the same study method and they're just not seeing those results, right? And they just continue going down that path. Just as an example here, I've seen plenty of instances where a student would try out a course with a particular prep company and they wouldn't see any results, and then they just go try out another prep course with another prep company. And then they just end up wasting hundreds and thousands of dollars just trying out various different courses without seeing any difference in their results. And at that point, you have to realize that maybe it's not the company, maybe it's your actual learning style, right? Maybe you're not really fit for a course. And there's certain advantages, right? There's certain advantages and disadvantages when it comes to a course. But keep in mind that if you're continuing trying out the same thing and continuously getting the same results, it's time to try out something new. So for those particular individuals who are trying out the courses, maybe they weren't able to keep up the pace of the course, right? Or maybe they just learn better with a private tutor who's able to more dissect their needs. So keep that into consideration. Try to figure out what ticks for you, what doesn't, as you go along in your studies. So the final mistake I wanted to discuss is trying to learn everything at once. And this is probably the most common thing. So I've seen many students who try to take practice test after practice test. I've actually seen some students who have taken every single practice test out there in existence and they still haven't seen any results. And I've also seen students who would just try to learn everything at once. They try to learn logical reasoning, reading comp, and logic games all at the same time. And I got to tell you, you're going to become very overwhelmed and you're going to get burnt out. Okay, so the reason why you don't want to learn everything at once is because there's just way too many concepts. Like I discussed before, it's tough to cram for this exam. In fact, it's probably impossible to cram for this exam. Okay, and the reason for that is because it's a skill-based exam, right? You can't become a great basketball player overnight. And in the same way, you can't become a great LSAT taker overnight either. Okay, so keep in mind that when it comes to this exam, a lot of times people will try to learn logical reasoning, but even within logical reasoning, there's so many different concepts, right? You have, depending on the curriculum you're using, anywhere from 11 to 13 different question types. And then you have certain concepts like conditional reasoning or cause and effect. And if you don't have a deep understanding of each of these, you're going to fall into the LSAT test maker's hands every single time. Okay, so it's more understanding that we understand things deeply more than just having a superficial understanding of everything, right? We don't want to just become the jack of all trades, master of none. So rather than even just trying to learn the entire section at once, my recommendation would be to break the section down into its smallest components, right? So just as an example here, let's take the logic game section. Rather than trying to learn all the different games at one time, just focus on one major game type and just practice that one alone. So then what's going to end up happening is as you master one particular game, you're then going to move on to the next game, but then you're going to start to realize that particular concepts are actually related to each other. So it actually becomes easier for you to master the more advanced concepts over time. So rather than just trying to learn everything at once, if you were to just focus on one thing, get really good at it, and then move on to the next, it actually becomes easier for you to learn those more challenging concepts, and then as a result, over time, your progress will become exponential. Will Smith is someone that I really admire, and there's a really great video that I watched of him, and he actually talked about how if you're trying to build a wall, you don't start off by just building the wall all at once. Rather than doing that, you're going to take one brick and you're going to set it down and you're going to lay it down in the most perfect way possible. Okay, you're going to lay it down and say, there is no one else in the world who could lay down this brick better than I can. And then you're going to continue doing that day by day. And each day you're going to start to realize that you're building up a good foundation. And then over time, before you know it, all of a sudden you have built this grand wall. Okay, so the same thing applies here with the LSAT. So thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. And if you did, please like and subscribe. And if you have any questions that you'd like answered in future videos, please reach out to me at impetuslsat@gmail.com. And if you'd like to learn more about my services and what I have to offer, please feel free to visit my website, www.impetuslsat.com. Thank you guys so much, and I'll see you next time.